everybody. Welcome to Rebel Soul Fuckery. Jaycie here, and I am super excited. I have Jennifer with me today, fantastic guest. And before the show, before we started recording, we were like, wait, what do we want to talk about today? And we kind of went down a different path I wasn't expecting. So I'm really excited that we are going to be sharing this conversation with you, because just because we are spiritual beings, just because we may be very connected, just because we're strong, powerful women or men that are leaders and business owners and you name it, doesn't mean that we don't encounter some really crap experiences in our life. But Jennifer has an interesting way of explaining how she's not a survivor and she's not a victim either. I want her to share that with you in a few minutes, because I freaking loved it. She cracked me up. So anyways, welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jaycie. It's so glad to be here.
Well, before we get started, would you kind of introduce yourself to my audience and let them know who you are and what you do? And then we're going to dive into this conversation.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Jennifer. I go by JJ because there's usually a couple dozen Jennifers in any room I walk into. But Jennifer's totally fine. And I am an AI solutionist and business strategist. I really specialize in helping people build automations and systems inside of their business that tap into their core values and the thing that makes them tick so that they can live the life that they're meant to live first, and then build their business around their goals and what they want to achieve on a human level, right? Because far too often business owners jump into being business owners and it becomes their whole identity, and they sacrifice who they are on a soul level and a human level, and spend all of their time, energy, and effort, and then ultimately burn out and burn bridges with their business, and repeat that process over and over again. So I really believe in building automations and systems that allow you to scale with ease. And that means tapping into technology like AI, making sure you're using automations effectively, and then all of that being built on the foundation of who you are, what matters to you, and the impact you want to create in the world.
I love it. And, my first company was a dance studio, which I started at 18 years old. And that on a soul level was my life. And so I was so connected to it. However, after teaching for 20 years, there were definitely times during those 20 years, especially when I had the 15, I had 16, whatever it was, I had my own studio, that there were days you're like, oh my God, this is a job, because it is still work. So I love that. And with this company, which this is my fourth or fifth company, but with Rebel Soul Fuckery, it's all about what can I automate? What can I make easier? Because it's not only is the core of the work that I do now about connecting to your soul and being in alignment, but it's also the freedom to travel, the freedom to do whatever, the financial freedom, obviously, but all those pieces. So it's super important to be very, very, to have life simple and easy, and business life simple and easy, so that you get to experience life and not just be stuck behind this computer or whatever.
Well, and to that point, I think easy is as much a mindset as it is like the experience. And easy doesn't mean that it doesn't take work. Easy doesn't mean that you don't have to put in effort. Easy just means the decisions are clear, your focus is clear, your intentions are clear, your alignment, you are on the right path. You're doing the things that feel aligned and feel easy, but you're still putting in work. You're still putting in energy. You're still putting in effort. And some days there will be days where you're just like, oh, God damn it, I'm tired.
Yes. Or there's days when you go, I just moved. Crap, I don't have everything set up. I'm like, well, too bad. Fuck it. We're going with it. Might have an echo, but we're going with it, because you just got to do it anyway. And it just is what it is.
100%. Yeah. And it's just recognizing that I get to decide that it's easy while still recognizing that I'm going to put in the work.
Yeah, exactly. And so this kind of is a great point to me to kind of pivot into the conversation we were having earlier, because I know that I dissolved the company a number of years ago, like 7, 8 years ago. I had clients all over the world. I was working with authors back then. And I dissolved that company because of a really fugly divorce. It was a really ugly, narcissistic person in a very different way than most narcissists are, super under the radar, manipulative bullshit. So then I ended up in a different relationship a few years after that. And at that time, that individual didn't understand the coaching world at all. He was not supportive, and on some levels was probably narcissistic in his own way, and had a lot of anger at himself. And so he got taken out on everyone around him, right? And so it kind of undermined, and which I would say that some of that was on me because I allowed it to
Right.
undermine building that new business. So I didn't build the new business until early 2024. And so I ended up leaving that relationship. And so all of that sparked head, it kind of went, oh, because you had brought up some stuff you went through. And it was kind of the same time frame, like some COVID times. And oh, there goes
Yeah.
my alarm. I'm so sorry. But COVID times and so forth and so on. So I really want to dive into that. And
Yeah.
would you share some of the story that how you ended up in Texas and you're Canadian, but you end up in Texas and getting married, and then things shifted.
Yeah, one of the things I realized looking back, like from the lessons I've learned, is that I was so in love with the idea of being in love as a
Yes.
27-year-old woman,
Yeah.
thinking that like to really be valuable or be like truly contributing, I had to be in a committed relationship. And so I was easy to manipulate. Hooray! Because I was really idealistic and romantic and had like a really soft romantic heart. And a truly narcissistic man took advantage of that. But I didn't see that for almost 9 years. So kind of how that worked out was 2010, I moved to Texas, we got married, things were great. He was a long haul trucker, so he was only home for like
Oh, yeah.
every other third weekend or so. So for 2.5 to 3 weeks at a time, I was single. I had a house, I had all
Yes.
this free time, I had a disposable income, and I was able to build. I started off as a lifestyle blogger, which pivoted into VA work and then pivoted into running a six-figure social media management agency. In 2017, I set a goal of hitting that first six-figure mark. And my now ex-husband's father was having some health issues. They were also our neighbor, which is a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. And he was really concerned about his dad's health. So I was like, listen, I'm hitting some milestones. Things are going really well
Hmm.
with the business. Why don't you retire? You can come home,
Hmm.
start your own business, do your own thing, whatever, and like be here for your parents. And he's like, hell yeah, let's go. And I'm like, I have one
Yeah.
condition. You find something to occupy your time. The
Yeah.
deal is you're not sitting here chain smoking because he was a smoker, and watching TV all day. And he's like, bet. Fast forward
Hmm.
3 months, what was he doing?
Yeah.
Two,
Yeah.
two pack a day habit watching TV, occasionally
Yeah.
stepping up to help his parents and doing a few things. But like it really was like less than ideal. Um,
Yeah.
and over the course of the next 2 years, the narcissistic abuse started
Yeah.
to really drastically take a toll. Fast forward to February of 2020, right? The whole
Mhm.
world shifted and changed. And I
Yeah.
didn't have any outlets because those were taken away, right? Like I had kind of been able
Yeah.
to juggle the impact of his abuse by just like going
Oh,
on
yeah.
business trips and going to conferences and like getting out of the
Right.
house and giving myself a break to kind of balance out my capacity
Hmm.
to support him and try to be a good wife and all this kind of stuff. So all of that was taken away. And I had a friend ask me one day in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, and be like, "Are you happy?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, yeah, sure." She's like, "No, are you act like happy?" Right? She'd observed some things. I was working with her very closely at the time. She was a client, and had developed a really good friendship. And she's like, I see some stuff and I really want you to ask yourself, are you happy? And I'm like, well, I'm not unhappy, right? And she's like,
Mhm.
Jennifer, there is no gray area of happiness. You are
Yeah.
happy or you are
Or you're
not.
not.
And that was like the little wiggle of the
Yeah.
first stone that caused the
Yeah.
whole mountain to fall apart.
You know what, JJ, that hits me too because I was in Phoenix, Arizona. We were traveling at the time, and this was a divorce that I had from my youngest child's father. And so it would have been 2017. And one of my dearest friends called me up and she said, are you okay? So it was the same question,
Yeah.
right? And I'm like, no, I knew for me, I already knew. I'm like, no, but what am I going to do? Because I had such
Right.
a young son and I wanted him to be a little older because I felt like I needed to emotionally protect him. So I made it another few months. But it was like for me it had taken years to finally pull
Yeah.
the plug on that relationship, but it was that thread, started to unravel on the sweater. That was that question that she asked, and boy did it start coming undone from
Well,
there. Yeah.
and once you acknowledge that you're unhappy or there's
Mm-hmm.
something wrong, like especially as women, once we recognize that,
Mm-hmm.
there's no going back. Like that is a
Right.
line in the sand. And so for me, I had to start asking myself a lot of questions like, what do I want? What am I willing to
Yes.
do to get it? Because all of the
Yep.
dreams and all of the goals I had had were in spite of him, not with him, right?
Mhm.
Like I
Right.
was going to
Yeah.
make these things happen in spite of him trying, like slowing me down or being resistant. And the more I dove into what mattered to me, ultimately,
Hmm.
I recognize now, like I was doing some really deep level core value work. Um, and I was looking at what I wanted, what I was willing to do to get it, what I was willing to sacrifice, what I was not willing to sacrifice. Um, and I came to this point in the road where I recognized that I had two paths forward. And the one was I could choose to stay in Texas and stay married to him
Hmm.
and have all of my things and have my dogs and have an okay house. And maybe one day in the future, my in-laws would pass away and we'd inherit a bunch of money and maybe things would get better at that point. But like it was going to be the long haul. And I had to accept the fact that I was probably peaked. Like we were not going to, it was not going to, our
Hmm.
relationship was never going to get better. Like I was tapped out. I was going to be as
Yeah.
much as I could grow the business and like I was at capacity if I chose that path. Like this was as good as it was ever going to get.
Hmm.
Or I could walk away from my things. I could rejig my
Hmm.
business. I could look at leaving behind my pets, which ultimately I had to do. Um, and I could leave behind everything I owned, get in a car, drive away, but have autonomy and the ability to choose my
Yeah.
own future, which I did not
That
have.
just strikes such a chord with me because when I left my partner in Texas, and COVID had already hit by then, so it was actually the early 2021 when I left, and my beloved dog, I couldn't take her with me at that time. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to do that. So I called my oldest son, and of course, she was kind of his dog and mine together. And I said, "Can you take her for now?"
Yeah.
And so what he did was instead of calling me back up or texting me, going, "Yeah, mom, I've talked to my wife, we're good," he said, "I've talked to my wife." Well, he didn't say it that way, but I'm not going to give their names away because they're such private people. But he was like, "I've talked to her, and why don't you just come stay with us? You can rent the mother-in-law quarters from of the house that they had." And that is what I actually did. And my youngest son and I went there and the dog. But then he still kept the dog for the next couple of years because I did a travel lifestyle for a while, which brought me back out Southwest. And, everything changes, right?
Yeah.
Um, so we have to make some really very difficult decisions
Yeah.
sometimes to ultimately, quote unquote, save
Yeah.
ourselves and
Yeah.
to reconnect with who we truly are.
Yeah. And I recognize that, that like my choice was doing what was best for me, all like for the long haul, or trying just to survive another day. And
Yeah.
I'm not a scrape by the skin of my teeth kind of girly. Like that is not who I am on a soul level or a human level. Like
Right.
I wanted so much more for myself and knew that I had an infinite capacity if I could change what resources I had just to give to myself. Because I was being sucked dry on a daily basis, just surviving with him.
And
And
when you were sharing this earlier, when you left, I want people to understand that sometimes it's very difficult in the physical act of
yes,
leaving
yeah, yeah,
because it
yeah,
wasn't easy. And
yeah,
I kind of went through the same thing. I left. Mine was I packed the truck because I had a big truck at the time. I packed it as full as I could get and everything that I could load and drove in an ice storm
oh gosh,
to get to my son's.
yeah,
So it's me and the dog. My youngest was at his father's for a little bit, but I drove me and the dog almost a 4 hour trip in the middle of a freaking ice storm to get
yeah.
there.
Yeah, so I left. I had orchestrated things covertly because there was some concerns around not that he would cause me harm, and I still fully believe that he would have never touched me. That was one thing that didn't happen in our relationship. There's no physical abuse. Every other form of abuse on the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Physical, not so much. Um, but like I was very worried about him using manipulation tactics and self-harm to
Yes.
try to
Mm-hmm.
keep me there.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't know until the morning I was leaving that that's what was happening. And
Yeah.
um, a friend came and picked me up. I threw everything I could possibly fit in her car. She drove me to Amarillo. A friend from in Amarillo picked me up, drove me to Colorado. And then from Colorado, one of my best friends and now actually business partner
Mm-hmm.
drove me across the country to Canada, to the Canadian border. And this is November 2020. So the whole world was in
Mm-hmm.
lockdown. So we were playing, I call it the greatest game of bathroom and gas roulette you will ever play, because we didn't know if we were going to have enough gas to get from one gas station to the next, or if we needed to use a
Crazy.
bathroom, if we were going to be
Right.
grabbing a roll of toilet paper and using the side of, the side of the
Yeah.
highway. There was no traffic, and we got to stay in five-star hotels for like $100 a night, which was like
Oh, wow.
kind of a bit of a luxury. Um, but it was so
Yeah.
stressful and so chaotic. And my mom picked me up at the Canadian border because that's kind of how the only way it would work. Because as an
Hmm.
American, my friend couldn't cross the border, but as a Canadian, they
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
deny me, right? And so my friend who drove me actually had to do more paperwork to spin around and not even really enter Canada because of the way the lockdowns and like that bit of a
Yeah.
no man's land
Yeah.
in a border works. Than I did as a Canadian who hadn't been to Canada in 10 years and didn't have any valid
Wow.
Canadian ID. Um, so it was
It's
a
interesting.
whole story. And then I went from COVID in Texas, which if you know anything about, 2020
Hmm.
and the reality of living in Texas, it was almost like a whatever, right? Like I lived in a
Yeah,
small
that's
town.
where
It
I
was
was
very much,
living.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
I
very
was
much
in
a
Texas in
whatever energy.
2020. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
To Ontario, Canada, which had some of the tightest lockdown measures and
Oh,
rules
wow.
of the whole world. So it was a bit of a culture shock, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I was so excited to be able to make choices for myself and actually dictate my
Hmm.
future that I was willing to go through all of that 100 times
Yeah.
if I had to. The only regret I have is that I wasn't able to take my dogs with me. Ultimately,
Yeah.
they ended
Yeah.
up in a very safe and loving home. I was able to make sure that happened before I left, but
That's
it
good.
killed me. And honestly,
Yeah.
that kept me in Texas long, like a couple months longer than
Hmm.
I should have stayed.
Yeah, no, totally. And and I what I did a couple of years ago is because I can be friends with this person, we just can't be in a relationship. Like we
Yeah.
said that a long time ago. So he went through cancer, and then I ended up going back to help for a little bit. And I was able to get my dog back from my son
Oh,
at that
yeah.
time. And so, she's still with me. And so I've moved her, now. And of course, I'm in a different relationship and so forth now. Beautiful, amazing.
Love
But
that for you.
I was trying to launch a new company when
Hmm.
all of that stuff happened, and I was there, and I knew I wasn't going to stay because very, very shortly, like all of his Dr. Jekyll, Mr.
Yeah.
Hyde rather, came out very
Yeah.
quickly. And I'm like, oh, I was just trying to help. And of course, you go back to help. He wants to try again. So there was that. But, it was, I that was the story which I tell, and so if anybody else has listened to the podcast much, they've heard the story. But as I was getting ready to launch a new company, I broke my leg like within
Oh
weeks,
man.
and literally broke it. I have a plate and 8 screws, and it involved the dog and all kinds of stuff. So I made it a funny story. I'm always like, yeah, it's a pig and a dog story, and I can tell it. I usually tell it. It's very fucking hilarious, but it was shit, right? Because I couldn't walk on it for 3 months, so I was stuck.
Yeah.
But the second I could put weight on it and actually walk on it, I was in my Jeep, had gotten a friend to get, load up the U-Haul, and I hauled my ass back to Arizona, which was about a 12, 13-hour drive with a leg
Wow.
I could barely walk on. But the trip back, though, that you were talking about the bathroom story, of course, when I went back to Texas for a little bit, COVID was over. We weren't having those issues. But we stopped at a gas station, and I still to this day have the picture of it. That I don't know if the sink was for tiny people, like, because it was literally down, like I was on my knees to wash. No joke. I have pictures
Oh
of
my
me on
goodness.
my knees washing my hands. I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Amazing.
I'm like,
Yeah.
well, if nothing else, I got a funny story or two here out of it. And
Right.
somehow I must have been meant to break my freaking leg, right? Like there's a lesson in that. Then you and I were talking about that, the stuff that
Yeah.
we learned.
Yeah. Yeah, when people, when I talk about the story, there's always would you change it? Do you regret being in
Mm-hmm.
Texas? And honestly, I don't regret
Yeah,
my choices to move there. I don't
right.
regret my choices to stay as long as I did. I wouldn't have built the business that I did. I wouldn't
Yep.
have the experience that I have. I wouldn't have met the people that actually ultimately helped me get out of that
Mm-hmm.
situation. And even now, like my business partner, I'd only known her
Yeah,
for like a year at the time, and she drove across the country
that's
for me,
amazing.
because she just really believed in me being able to be safe and cared for me enough to
Yeah,
like go out of her way and like sacrifice that. And it built a really solid
yeah,
relationship that we're now like doing epic things. We just launched a membership called Enchantria. And,
love it.
it's all about like those relationships. But I had to get okay with being uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
which for me was not easy because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and I dealt a lot with like feeling like a failure in that like
Mm-hmm.
I had failed my second marriage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my first one was like 6 months and not my fault at all. Good old starter marriage. But this one I
Yeah.
put in 10 years and I had built something and I had a reputation and I was really concerned about all of that. And ultimately I
Mm-hmm.
decided that that was less important than me being able to have control over everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing about narcissists is whether it's covert narcissism, which tends to be more common
Mm-hmm.
versus overt narcissism, you don't really, you think you can make choices and you think you have
Mm-hmm.
control over some things, but the reality is there's very little that you actually can make clear and effective decisions on. And like the way I spent my money in my business, my business was named,
Mm-hmm.
like all of that he had a direct hand in. And
Oh, wow.
I wanted a clean break. Like I needed a clean
Yeah.
start. And when you get back and you're really in the thick of like the first round of healing of all of this, people are like, "Oh, you're so strong. You're such a survivor." And I honestly like wanted to throat punch at least a handful of
Mm-hmm.
people that were like, "Wow, you're so strong. Like that's such a great story of surviving."
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? I was not strong. I was desperate. I was
Yeah.
drowning. Like I was
Yeah.
drowning.
You just
And
fucking saved yourself. That's all you
yeah,
did.
yeah,
You made the choice to save yourself,
yeah.
and that
And
you don't have a choice but to be strong. It's not that
right.
you're just naturally like, oh, I'm so strong. It's like,
Yeah,
well, it was that or drown,
right. And so,
right?
I kept challenging on people on that because people who have not been through a situation
Mm-hmm.
like that, or even something that's really like challenging and life altering, don't recognize that when you're strong, it's not because you want to be, it's because you
Right.
have to be. Um, and strong is not a compliment, in my opinion. And so I was challenging them and being like, it's not about strength and it's not about surviving. So I'm not a victim and I'm not a
Yeah.
survivor. And one day I found myself saying, I'm a goddamn bouncy ball. And like this person I was talking to looked at me and like, okay, JJ, like what the hell? And I'm like, the harder you throw me down, the
Mm-hmm.
harder you try to throw me against the ground and destroy me,
Mm-hmm.
the higher I bounce back because I'm
Mm-hmm.
resilient. And I really leaned into owning resilience
Mm-hmm.
as instead of surviving, instead
Mm-hmm.
of like, oh, you're so strong. Strength and surviving are like no words for me when it comes to like talking to people who are in recovery or like any sort of like health crisis or any sort of like family or relationship crisis. It's not about being strong. It's not about surviving.
Yeah.
Because if you identify and you own the like identity of a survivor, that's all you're ever going to be. You're only ever just going
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
survive. And I was determined to not only get past that situation and move into the next phase of my life, but I also recognized how I walked away from that was how I was going to enter the next chapter,
Mm-hmm.
right? The way you
Yeah.
exit one room is the way you enter another.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't going to do it on my hands and knees. I wasn't going to
No,
do it
it's your head held
crawling.
high and you
Yeah,
just walk, you just do it. Yeah.
yeah. And honestly, I really believe that set me up for the success that I've experienced over the last 4 years. Um, and everything amazing that has happened to me since then.
Mm-hmm.
I have a great partner now. I have four pets because we doubled
Yeah.
down. I went from two to four, two in Texas to four here. A big believer in rescues, and I have plans to launch a nonprofit that actually the goal is to be able to keep people who are going through domestic violence of any sort
Mm-hmm.
with their pets long term, or create resources that allow them to very easily get their animals back once they've settled.
Oh my God, JJ, I
Um,
love that because our
yeah,
animals, I've said it about my dog. I've gotten her through a lot of things because she got hit by a car and had her
yeah.
own broken right leg.
Oh goodness.
But she and I have gotten each other through so much stuff.
Yeah,
And even though she was without me or if I was out without her for a time, so much,
yeah.
like so much we've gone through together. And yeah, that can be really devastating to not have them with you. When
Yeah.
even if you consciously make that choice and you know it's for the best, it's very, very, very difficult to do.
It was an emotional toll that I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't realize that it was going to, well, I'm getting emotional. I didn't realize that
Oh yeah.
even 4 years later, I would be grieving them
Yeah.
and the loss of them because I didn't have children. They were my babies, right?
Yeah.
I'm one
Yeah.
of those millennials that didn't have kid and I'm a dog mom. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all.
They were my children and I spoiled
Yes.
them rotten and they
Yes.
they kept me going on the days where I didn't think I had enough strength or energy anymore to
Mhm.
put up with what I was dealing with, or to stay strong enough to make it through the day.
Mhm.
So to have to walk away from them
Yeah.
and having to choose that, but ultimately it came down to living to see the next day, right?
Yeah.
Because the stress was taking a hold on my health.
Yeah.
I have some chronic illnesses that I was diagnosed with long before I went to Texas, but I was dealing with medical abuse. I was dealing with financial abuse. Like
Mhm.
the verbal and mental abuse was absolutely astronomical. I didn't have access to health care because of this man. And ultimately, like it was taking me down. And if I had chosen to
Yeah.
stay, I don't know that I would have made it another year physically because of the toll it was taking on my body. Um, so I chose life,
Mm.
right? Like I
Yeah.
chose to live.
Yeah.
I chose to be that bouncy ball
Mhm.
and to bounce back higher and to do more
Mhm.
amazing things. And now I'm choosing to let that story and that grief fuel me into the future and the things that I want to do outside of business, right? Because I'm not just
Yeah.
a business person and a business
Yeah.
strategist.
Right.
So much
Right.
more to me. And one of the things I'm going to be doing probably in 2026 is launching that nonprofit.
Love it. Oh my goodness. I absolutely love it. I'm so happy you shared this story. I think it's just, again, I reiterate, just because we are, as women, we're really strong, powerful women. And there are, of course, men out there that are resilient. Sorry, I did the strong word to you. But resilient, powerful women or men and leaders, we still sometimes have those people in our lives that really cut us down and fuck us
Yeah.
up. And it doesn't matter how intelligent we are, how powerful we are, how resilient we are. In those moments, we have to find a way out of it. And when you're in the trenches of it, it's not easy to do. And the people that go, why don't you just leave? Don't fucking
Ugh.
understand unless they've been there. And that's not even about the physical violence, right? But that
Yeah.
mental, emotional, all of it. I had spiritual abuse that happened, all kinds of stuff. And so we need the support systems and we need the other people to know, women especially, but men as well that go through it. It doesn't make you less of a person. It's okay to go through it. Just, see the light at the other end of the tunnel, double down, and there are people that can help you get through that and come out on the other side stronger, more resilient, bouncing higher, and just being fucking rock stars because you can.
Yeah. Well, and I think to add to that, like the world needs you, and someone on
Yes.
the other side of that hard season
Yeah.
needs your story to be able to get out of
Yes.
their own hard season. And I
Yep.
know just from the handful of people that I've shared my story on a couple podcasts and I'm very open about it. It's been 4 years, so it hurts a lot less now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like even just in sharing that, I know people have reached out to me and been like, I needed to hear that.
Mhm.
I'm leaving tomorrow because of your story. Um,
Yeah.
and to show them that you get to make choices and you get to
Mhm.
choose your future even when you feel like you have no future, like to find that inner fortitude and tap into that wellspring of resilience that exists in every single one of us,
Mhm.
to be able to pull yourself through that season and get to the other side so that you can then turn around and
Yeah.
pull the next person that needs to get out behind you. There's something that's just so magical about
It
being in that
is.
position. And if nothing else can give you this, that strength, womp womp, but like the strength to find that inner resilience, then let that be the thing
Yeah.
that drives you forward is the person behind you needs you to show them the way.
Yeah. They absolutely do. They need to know, okay, they made it. I can do this.
Yeah,
Yeah. They need to know they're not alone too. But
100%.
so as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm so happy you shared this story. It wasn't expected, but I'm glad that we went this direction because I do think that makes us rebels even in of itself, right? To go,
100%.
we're not gonna just buckle down and do this. No, we're finding a way to make the changes, and it can be a, I don't want to say a last minute decision, but a plan of attack, and then all of a sudden, bam, I'm gone.
Yeah,
And so that can happen, and I've been there. So alongside you, so I think that's amazing to share that as well. So will you share with everyone though? And of course, it'll be in the show notes. But how can they find you online to either work with you to help them with their brand or some AI strategy or whatnot, or if they just want to have a conversation with you, in regards to what we were just talking about? Like you said, some other people have reached out.
yeah, I love chatting with women about this, or people who are experiencing their own version of narcissistic trauma. I'm an open book, so feel free to ask me anything. I hang out mostly on Instagram at the Jennifer Jayne. It's Jayne. There's an extra, letter in there because my mom named me after herself. And then also the jenniferjayne.com is my website. And I have a Facebook group called Collaboration and Community for Fempreneurs. That's all about finding collaboration opportunities like being on people's podcasts,
Love it.
to help support your business and build your own mission and hand you the spotlight so you can talk about the amazing things that you do.
Love it. Love it. Love it so much. Well, thank you again, JJ, for hanging out and sharing this really powerful story that we shared today. And I'm just like, I just want to hug you. I just want to go, you're fucking awesome. I know. I was like, virtual hug, just to have gone through it, because that will always be a part of your story. But so many people from now until when you leave this particular lifetime behind, they're going to need to hear that story. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad I came.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, everybody, we're out of here for today. I'm Jaycie. And of course, if you are like, wait, I just need to be around other rebels. I need a space to talk about my shiznit, my woo-woo stuff. I just need a good community that makes sense to me. Then you need to reach out, because I do have the Rebel Soul VIP Inner Circle, and that's exactly what we do. It's the whole soul of your business. So it gets into the practical woo-woo, and it also gets into the speaking and how to present. There's all this shiznit that comes together, but it's a bunch of us rebels that, we're big and bold and not afraid to share our stories and be exactly who the fuck we are. So go out there and stir up some fuckery and create some shenanigans and have a damn good time doing it.